Good morning, everyone. My clock is showing 10 o'clock, so I will get us started. We know you have other things to be doing today. Can everyone hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Awesome, sounds good. We really appreciate you all joining us today. We have a great trainer that's joining us, and we're also really happy to see a lot of familiar faces and names. You guys have been joining us all spring, summer, and fall for PD and for meetings, and I think that really helps us all feel connected. Oh, there's our timer. We're getting going. So we appreciate you joining us. We are thrilled to be joined today by Officer Adam Argullin. Officer Argullin has worked with us for several years and has done just about everything. I have learned even more today. He was a DARE officer, so he is used to working with students, which couldn't be more appropriate for our audience. He did FBI raids, I learned today, is a skilled musician who does really great student assemblies using drums to engage young people. So I would encourage you guys to look into that. And I learned today he's a woodworker. So there's not much that Officer Argullin doesn't do. Fortunately, he somehow finds the time to join us for these trainings. Has done several times over the years. So we thought it was time for an update on current drug trends, since that's exactly what a trend is, and they change, and we wanted some up-to-date information. So without further ado, please welcome Officer Adam Argullin. Thanks, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Adam. It's retired officer now. I started doing presentations for you guys back in 2013 is when I did my first conference. It was always nice to be asked to come back to EKU's campus. I'm a graduate of Eastern Kentucky University, like I'm sure some of you guys are. A lot of you may remember me from trainings past, and for those of you that I haven't met yet, good morning and thanks for having me. My presentation today is current drug trends. I've presented a similar presentation like this for you folks a lot of times, but I will tell you, by the luck of the draw, this is going to be a little bit different than the rest of them, mostly because technology crashed on me. I lost every presentation, every invoice, and everything I had on my flash drive in March of this year. So I've had to completely rewrite and revamp every presentation and class that I've ever written. So for those of you that have seen this presentation, that's good for you. It's good for me because it kept me on my toes, and I was able to include a lot of new pictures, a lot of new information that I had. This presentation is going to be predominantly PowerPoint driven. I promise it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's going to be interactive, and everything that I have to say will run in tandem with the presentation that I have. So I'll pull that up in here in just a minute. So there will be a point during this presentation where we're going to take a bathroom break, and we'll also open it up towards the end for question and answers, because that's the thing about these presentations. I know that you have questions, and hopefully I can provide the answer to you. Besides, I'm a retired police officer. If I don't know the answer, I'll lie to you, because that's what we're trained to do. Kidding, totally kidding, unless that's how it rolls where you guys are from. Let me see if I can pull this up. Give me 1 second. I'm going to get the presentation pulled up for you. Hopefully you guys have my presentation pulled up. Can you see it, Katie?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right, so what you see in front of you is my presentation. Like I said, everything's going to follow along with PowerPoint. I'm not one of those guys that gives you every single word I say up on the screen. I personally hate it when people do that. So this is nothing like that at all. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see I'm all over social media. Not that I'm super interesting or anything like that, but I always throw those options up there to you. That's my website. I've got 3 Facebook pages, Twitter, Snapchat if you can find me, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel, although I haven't uploaded any content in quite a while. But the reason I throw those up there is because it's a great way to connect with people, and it's also another option as far as contacting me after today. One of the things that I've always found is that people always have questions after these trainings, and these are the best ways to get in touch with me. So I retired from policing earlier this year. It wasn't something I had completely planned to do, but I retired at February 1st of this past year. I'm glad I did it when I did it, because I totally missed out on the whole policing during COVID and everything else that we had. As Katie said earlier, I spent 2.5 years undercover. I was assigned to the FBI, and what I did was anything and all things drugs. Most of the time, you'll hear about drug officers that don't get to do their own buys. They allowed me to do my own undercover buys, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing that, because one of my first jobs that I ever had, I was an actor at an amusement park when I was young. I started doing that when I was 10 or 11. And to me, being good at undercover was just acting. You're selling yourself in a way that's unlike anything else. So I thoroughly enjoyed doing undercover. In 2007, I had this opportunity with my police department to become certified as a drug recognition expert. And what a DRE does, and some of your jurisdictions and communities have officers that are certified as DREs. I probably trained them. A drug recognition expert can go to court and testify on the expert level as to how any drug impairs the human body. And it's a very intense course. It's a lot of medical training, and I love it. I mean, I love drugs. And that's a weird statement to come from somebody who spent a career in law enforcement, but I absolutely love drugs. I love understanding what drugs do to the body. I love understanding what leads to addiction. I love all those things because it affects us. And if I can take a little bit of my experience, information, give it to you guys, and it helps you along the way, then perfect. After becoming a DRE, the Academy in Richmond asked me if I wanted to become an instructor on the program, which is awesome, because I was realizing I had a niche for teaching. So I went to school to be a DRE instructor, and that was in 2008. And every year since then, I've trained people in the DRE program through the Department of Criminal Justice Training, and now I'm actually a contract instructor for the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety. That's how I'm spending my time now. I was a DARE officer for my police department. I taught DARE for 9 years, and I loved teaching DARE. I liked taking my experience as a drug recognition expert and using that to teach DARE, because for those of you that have DARE or receive DARE or know much about the DARE program, DARE really only covers tobacco, alcohol, and that's it. It doesn't even get into marijuana anymore. There's no lessons on the other harder drugs. And the reason that is because the people at DARE America always felt like there's a fine line between teaching somebody something and giving them ideas, which, as we know from just about every community in this Commonwealth of Kentucky, they know about this stuff, whether they're seeing it at home, on TV, or hearing about it in the news. It's there. So I was that far incorporate my background working in drugs to teach students that way. So I am glad that I had those opportunities, and I'm glad that I've had my training, and hopefully now I can use all my training and experience to help you guys, which is going to in turn help students in our communities. So that's a little bit about my career and things like that. And in addition to retiring from policing, I am a musician. I started playing drums when I was 5. I got my first gig when I was 11. I got my first paid gig at 11. Started playing out in clubs and bars when I was 14, and I ended up going to college on a music scholarship. So that's a little bit about my music history. So that's the other thing too. Knowing what I know about drugs and understanding it has helped me, because I'm around drugs all the time. I was around drugs on duty. I was around drugs off duty. Because let's face it, it wasn't uncommon to play music or be around people that were stoned, using something else, whatever the case may be. So that's why I love drugs so much, because I'm around it all the time. Even now, I feel like I'm constantly around it. So I guess the best thing for me to do is to start at the beginning. What is a drug? There's this definition that we give in DRE school, which is complicated, because I have to show that when people are using drugs, it affects their body. So I give this definition to all my students of a drug is something that affects the body to the point a person couldn't operate a motor vehicle. That's the generic way of putting it. But I realize that it should be a whole lot simpler, especially for our terms. So what I'd like to do, especially when I taught DARE, was break it down to what Merriam-Webster said, and that a drug is basically something other than food that affects your body, which means a lot of things could be drugs. But at the same time, when we think of drugs, a lot of times we consider drugs as something that's illegal. The fact is, the vast majority of drugs are completely legal under certain circumstances. For example, tobacco is technically a drug. If you look at that definition, it affects your body. It's not a food. And growing up in Western Kentucky, because I'm here in Northern Kentucky now, but I grew up in Western Kentucky. And where I grew up, tobacco was kind of everywhere. And a lot of people never would consider it to be a drug because it's kind of normal. Just the way a lot of people don't consider alcohol to be a drug because it's common and it's something we see every day. And there's a legal age in which you're allowed to use those, 18 for tobacco, 21 for alcohol. But that doesn't mean it doesn't affect your body. But at the same time, if you think about it, I mentioned legal versus the definition that's on the screen right now. If you think about it, paint, something like paint or something that a person could huff, by this definition, that's a drug, but by legal standards, it's not illegal to possess spray paint or compressed air or even nail polish remover, something like that, which a person could use those objects to get high, but it's illegal to possess. So it's kind of a gray area. There's even been a case in terms of law enforcement goes where a police department was able to get a conviction for DUI on caffeine, which was kind of unheard of to me, but that person was completely impaired to the point that it was unsafe for them to operate that vehicle at the time. That was a rarity, but it happens. I mentioned tobacco. Growing up in Western Kentucky, like I said, I saw a lot of tobacco. I remember people being absent from school because they were helping their family with certain processes of the harvesting of tobacco, because literally that was most families' biggest source of income. There's tobacco barns littering up and down every road where I'm from, fields of tobacco as far as the eye can see. It's weird because this small town grocery store where we did all our shopping didn't have like a display case of tobacco products. They had an entire aisle of different objects and products, stuff that I've never seen since. But tobacco was huge. And it's been my experience in law enforcement that tobacco has a tendency to be the first drug that a person decides to delve into, mostly because it's readily available. It's accessible and it's no big deal is what a lot of people say. It's fine. I can use it in a couple of years. It's not gonna kill me. But the fact is, tobacco kills more Americans each year than all of the other drugs I'm going to talk about today combined, because it is harmful. And I'm not down on anybody that uses tobacco products at all. I'm not. I don't shame people or anything like that. I'm just simply stating a fact that tobacco has a tendency to be one of the first drugs that people use. I always hated using the term gateway drug, but it typically starts with tobacco. And from tobacco, it'll segue into alcohol. Again, it's accessible. And from that, it goes on to marijuana, mostly because it's socially acceptable nowadays. When I would do school assembly programs, and 2020 has been challenging for me not getting to do school assembly programs, mostly because I absolutely loved going into schools, playing drums, talking about drugs. If I went into a school without a uniform on, played some drums, had my tattoo showing, I was suddenly cool. Even though I was talking about the same stuff I would as an officer, they listened. It was totally different, and I miss those days. But I had so many people tell me that marijuana is not a big deal. It's going to be legal one day. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. But the fact is, it doesn't make it any less harmful. Tobacco is legal, but it's just as harmful. So it's become socially acceptable, which makes me wonder, 10 years from now, what drug is going to be socially acceptable? Is it going to be no big deal to hit a line of smack in a vein? I mean, I wonder what it's going to be like 10 years from now. So I guess we shall see. The 7 drug categories that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about different drugs from each of these 7 categories are on your screen. We're going to start off by talking about CNS depressants. CNS stands for central nervous system. These are going to be basically drugs that will depress the central nervous system. And I'll give you some examples here in just a moment and talk about what those drugs actually do to the body, but better yet, how to tell when somebody's using them, because that's one of the things that I like about this presentation is I want to give you some tools to help you spot when somebody's using and different ways that people use and that you might come across. What's also great about this is not just for students. It's not just for kids. As sad as this is, I have to do this presentation a lot of times at elementary schools, not because the students are the ones using it. And I'm talking about giving this presentation and this training to staff and faculty. A lot of times it's because of the parents. And in certain circumstances, it's been used by administration to catch employees. I did a school assembly and a school training at a county in Eastern Kentucky, and they will remain nameless, but literally came in and did during Red Ribbon Week some years back. I did this presentation where I did a school assembly program and a training to all the faculty, and a few days later, one of the teachers was actually caught shooting heroin. So it's got a lot of benefits to it. But aside from that, we all have families. And around the holidays, this might be beneficial because you might pick up on something that somebody exhibits. And again, you have the opportunity to step in and help them out. So we're going to go from depressants on to inhalants, dissociative anesthetics, cannabis, stimulants, hallucinogens, and narcotic analgesics. These are the 7 drug categories that are recognized by the DRE program, and that's the ones I'm going to focus on today. So you'll see a very big variety of drugs that fit into those categories, and we'll talk about some of the different symptomology that those drugs will give off and that a person will display when they've been using those drugs. I put these on the screen for the simple fact that it's important to understand drugs affect these 3 systems of the body. For example, a drug like alcohol will lower a person's pulse rate, whereas a drug like cocaine or methamphetamine is going to raise a person's pulse rate. So it's understanding, how do you spot when somebody's got a elevated pulse? You can see you can sometimes see the carotid artery bouncing. You can tell that a person, when their pulse is up, they're going to be jittery and animated, and moving around. They can't stand still. But when a person's pulse rate's a lot lower, they're going to be a little bit more relaxed, sedated, slower, lethargic. Blood pressure. When a person's blood pressure is up, their face becomes red because a higher blood pressure causes the blood to come towards the surface of the skin, whereas lower will cause it to go away and give a person a pale, cold and clammy appearance and feel. So it's just understanding basics of how the body works. And then we're going to talk about what the different drugs do in terms of these vital signs. Another thing that drugs do in effect, aside from these vital signs, are the eyes. William Shakespeare said that the windows are the eyes to the soul. And if a person understands what the eyes do and what drugs do to the eyes, it makes it much easier to tell when a person's under the influence. For example, the eyes, the pupils specifically, are ever changing. Your pupils will constantly change the size that they are based on the lighting conditions. Like right now, I'm pretty well lit up right now from the lights in this room, and my pupils are smaller. I always tell people that a great way to gauge a pupil size, if they're truly constricted, which pupils get constricted or smaller in very high lighting conditions. Think about the tip of a pen. The very small tip of a pen is way too tiny for a person's pupils. That's when you're looking at direct light or have a light shine in your eye. When you go to the doctor and they shine that light in your eye, what they're looking is for the reaction to light. That's why I always liked understanding this and teaching new officers. When an officer pulls you over, especially at nighttime, they can see the change in your pupil size. The moment they walk up to the vehicle, they turn their light on, and that light hits your eyes, You know, under normal circumstances, if there's no drugs in the system, you will literally see their pupils shrink down. They'll go from big because they're dilated because there's the absence of light at night. But then the moment that direct light hits the eyes, they shrink down. So you can observe this day to day because the pupils are ever changing. So if a person's been using a drug that will cause them to dilate and be bigger, one of the things, which means that it's letting more light in, one of the things that I have found is that they have a tendency to wear sunglasses more often, especially indoors. I mentioned this during a training one time, and then a couple days later, I had front office staff at a school tell me that they had this parent that they had been suspecting was using drugs. And they came into the front office, and they were always very animated and jittery and couldn't stand still. I was talking, 200 miles an hour. And they said that one of the things they noticed was they never would take the sunglasses off. Even when they went into the office to have their picture taken to sign in, they never wanted to take their sunglasses off. And the times when they would make them take the sunglasses off, they would wince and kind of like the light was hurting them. And that was one of the things that tipped them off that that person had been using methamphetamine, and it ended up being that that parent was a meth addict. And it's things like that that you just look at a little harder. One of the things that I've always done is, and I know it sounds weird to some people, but I will shade a person's eyes. I will just add a little bit of shade or put them in a position where it goes from direct light to a darker lighting setting to see if there's a change in the pupils. Because if they're under the influence of a drug that causes them to dilate, there's not going to be a lot of change. If they're under the influence of a drug that causes them to constrict, there's not going to be a lot of change when the lighting conditions change. I know I'm throwing a lot of information out at you quickly, but that's why I always encourage people to ask questions later on down the road. So my goal when I evaluate somebody or I'm checking them out for drugs is I'm determining whether or not they're impaired or not. See, the biggest reason the DRE program came to be was because in terms of alcohol, there's a legal limit at 0.08 of a blood alcohol concentration. There's not a legal limit when it comes to prescription pills. There's not a legal limit when it comes to marijuana or methamphetamine or anything else. There's nothing that says this person's under the influence because they had this much when it comes to drugs. So I determine and prove that they are impaired. And that's kind of what it's all about, as you can see by the definition by Merriam-Webster. It's being in less than perfect or whole condition. So let's talk about the first category of drugs. And for those of you that have any paper sitting around, I noticed most of you were at desks and things like that. If you have any questions, scratch them down. If you want to take notes, feel free to do so. There won't be a test at the end of this or anything like that. But if you have questions, scratch them down. And towards the end of this, we can share those questions and I can help answer them. So on the screen right now, you will see a bunch of common CNS depressants. The most commonly abused depressant in not only the United States, but the world would be alcohol, And here's the thing. I'm going to give you basic math for those of you that like to partake. And I just throw this out there because I think it's interesting to think about. The standard serving of alcohol is 12 ounces. I'm sorry, standard serving of beer is 12 ounces. For wine, it's 4 to 6 ounces, depending on the strength. And for liquor, it's a half to 1 ounce. Those are considered one serving. One serving taken within an hour will roughly put your blood alcohol concentration at a 0.02, which means that if a person were to consume 4 alcoholic beverages in 1 hour, in one sitting, that would roughly put them at 0.08. Now, your body also dissipates alcohol roughly at 0.02 per hour. So that means 4 drinks, 1 hour would have put you at 0.08. You get rid of one because that's the way the body works, brings you down to an 0.06. So if this helps you when you're out at Applebee's or whatever, there you go. The difference is this. When people start mixing alcohol, if you go to Applebee's, for example, and have a Brutus, that's 21 or 23 ounces. So it changes things a little bit. If a person's drinking a pint, that's 16 ounces. So that's going to change the math a little bit. If they're drinking something like an Irish Car Bomb, that's roughly 2 1/4 servings of alcohol, and just in that one thing. So it changes the dynamic quite a bit. So some of the other drugs that you see on the screen right now would be Valium, Xanax. The thing about those is one of them is for depression and one of them is for anxiety. Those are diagnoses that deal with the brain. So drugs in this category are things that deal with mood or personality or mental disorders of that nature. Even Ambien, which is used for sleep, it's treating it up in the brain. So all of these drugs fit into the same category as alcohol. So if it helps you think about it, that means all these drugs, if abused or under the influence of, are going to make a person seem like they're drunk, if that helps. One of the things that this category of drug does is it causes something called nystagmus. Nystagmus is the involuntary jerking of the eyes. So if you've ever seen a police officer give a DUI test on the roadside and they're asking a person to follow their finger with their eyes and their eyes only, they're going back and forth. What that officer is doing is actually looking for the presence of nystagmus. See, a person can train themselves to do well on the walk and turn test. They can practice the one leg stand, but there's absolutely nothing you can do to perfect or not exhibit nystagmus. It just happens naturally when a person consumes certain categories of drugs, depressants being one of them, which alcohol is a part of this category. So that's what an officer is looking for. That's the thing. If I have a person that's impaired from, say, Ambien, which will impair you very much so, the most impaired driver that I've ever personally had contact with was an Ambien DUI. They had taken, you're supposed to take one Ambien per hour. It's what most doctors will recommend. She had 3 and she was just tore up. I mean, she was a mess, but she had great nystagmus. It was very, the pupils would normally just move back and forth as they were watching my finger. When a person has nystagmus, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing their eyes move through a system of jerks. And that's what I noticed. And she had very vivid and distinct nystagmus. So one of the things that I've always taught officers too is, and this might help you as well, when I would walk up to a vehicle, I would stand back from the window a little bit. And that would cause a person to turn to look to see where the sound was coming from. I always tried to stand where they couldn't see me readily. They had to turn as far as they could. Well, that also put their pupils at maximum deviation in their eye sockets. Well, when the pupils are at maximum deviation, when they're as far as they can go in the eye socket, if they have a drug on board that causes nystagmus, then their pupils would just sit there and bounce in the corner of their eyes. So it would always help me. So I've also taught people when they're interviewing people, try to get them to sit down and try to move around the room where they have to look out of the corner of their eyes for an extended period of time, like around 4 or 5 seconds straight. And sometimes you'll see nystagmus. So maybe that'll help you out. The other thing about this category of drugs is it lowers the pulse rate, which I mentioned. That's why sometimes when people drink in excess, they pass out because their heart rate slows down too much. Same with the other things. Same with Ambien. Same with Xanax. Same with Valium. Soma, whatever the case may be. Klonopin falls in this category. It all does the exact same thing. It lowers the pulse rate. It also lowers the blood pressure, but not in a healthy way. So those are distinguishing characteristics of drugs from this category. So they will slow a person down, sedate them. Just think about your classic drunk: slurred speech, the thick tongue, bloodshot eyes, and that's what's kind of neat about this category. We always associate bloodshot eyes with either alcohol or marijuana, which marijuana is not in this category, but even the other drugs, the prescription stuff, will cause the bloodshot eyes, watery eyes, things of that nature. So that's a little bit about this category. I know I'm running through these quickly, but that's why, again, if you have questions later on down the road, we can get to those. So I'm going to move on from depressants, and we'll get into next category, which we're going to talk about inhalants. Now, I have found through personal experience that we are seeing a rise in inhalants, mostly because they're easy to get your hands on. I mean, just look around what you see on the screen. These are things that, we have. I guarantee you, probably everybody in this training today has at least one of these, either in their garage, under their sink, in their office even, or possibly their fridge. As you can see in the bottom corner there, you see Ready Whip, and people always like, what's wrong with whipped cream? Absolutely nothing. Nothing is wrong with it whatsoever. But if you think about the mechanics of it, that's a can of whipped cream. Something has to propel it out of the can. There's a gas inside there. It's nitrous oxide. For those of you that have ever had nitrous oxide, it's amazing. It's delicious, and I love it. Yes, I am saying that to you right now because I've had some dental work done. I've had root canals, and I've had nitrous oxide. That medical grade nitrous oxide is the same thing that's in Whippets, which is just to the corner of it, those little canisters. It's the same propellant that's in whipped cream. It's amazing. I've never been so stoned in all my life. And I don't like going to the doctor. I don't like going to the dentist, but I'm okay with that. But if you've ever bought a can of whipped cream and you got it home and it didn't work, well, then somebody's already ripped the top off and taken the first 8-second hit of what some people refer to as hippie crack. But that's what gets it out of the can. See, the cream settles at the bottom, the gas goes to the top when it's sitting on the shelf. So people that like to abuse this particular inhalant won't shake it up. They won't disturb it. They're going to try to leave it settle. That way they can get the gas off the top of it. Paint is still another one that people will abuse. If you notice the fine upstanding citizen at the bottom of the screen right now, who's grinning ear to ear and stoned out of his mind, he prefers silver metallic paint. When you catch people that do like to abuse paint, they are typically going to be the kind that abuse either gold or silver. The metallic colors, because they contain more of a chemical called toluene, and it makes them feel higher, and it looks good. Let's just be honest. That's a good look for him. Some of the other things that you see on the screen right now, certain types of glue, and as I mentioned before, that dust off right in the center of the screen, compressed air, keyboard cleaner. I know that you're thinking it's just air, it's just in a can. Well, there's actually a chemical that propels the air out of the can. That chemical is desirable to people who like to abuse inhalants. And for those that like this sort of high, they love compressed air. For those of you that ever use compressed air, you know that when you use it, it comes out cold. So one of the things that you will find when people abuse compressed air, frostbite, and I know it sounds crazy that that's possible, but it's not uncommon for people to abuse frostbite. Now, something I want you to think about with all the drugs in this category, these inhalants, this is a lack of oxygen. So they're getting a lack of oxygen to the brain. That's where the impairment comes from. That's what's getting them high, is that oxygen deprivation. So if you think about it in terms of that, all a person needs to correct themselves and to get unhigh or to be a little bit more normal again is to breathe. There's a video that I show in DRE school, and I couldn't get a copy of it for this. There's a guy in, I believe it's in Pennsylvania. Somebody shot this at a Walmart in a parking lot. Guy pulls into a parking spot and he's getting ready to get out, and he notices there's this dude in the car next to him. And the guy gets out of the car and he's stumbling around. He's obviously having a hard time. Goes to the trunk, looks around, and he gets in his trunk and he gets out a can of dust off. And he kind of leans in the trunk so nobody can see him. And he puts the can up to his lips and takes just a really hard, heavy hit. Drops the can in the trunk, shuts the lid, and he's like stumbling around, like having a hard time. Falls over, and he drifts off to space for a minute. He's kind of making some strange sounds, but this only lasts like 8, 10, 12 seconds max. And then he's coming to, goes back to the trunk, hits the can again. Same results, stumbling around. This time he falls into the guy that's videoing his truck. Guy just leans up against his truck for a minute, corrects himself, and then goes back to the trunk. He repeats this cycle like 4 or 5 times, because that's what a person that goes for this type of high is going to have to do. Because alcohol, that's a 2, 3, depending on the quantity, 4-hour high. This is very short-lived. So they're going to have to continuously do it. Every time they're doing that, they're depriving the brain of oxygen. That's why brain damage And there's even a symptom called sudden sniffing death that can occur from people that abuse these inhalants. I guarantee you all of us have experienced this type of high before. If you've ever walked in a room that was freshly painted and poorly ventilated, you've probably felt this type of high on a smaller level. If you've ever been at a party or a wedding and you bit the corner off a helium balloon and you sucked some in and sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I'm not judging if that were you. Could have been at the same wedding, I don't know. But if you've ever done that, you felt a little bit of a high. And it's the same sort of rush, and that's kind of what they're going for. So thing about this category, this also causes nystagmus that I mentioned before. But if you think about all these things that we're talking about that they're huffing in, they're chemicals. You know, a person's going to have that chemical odor on or about their person. No one should ever have the odor of gasoline on their breath. They shouldn't have the odor of paint emanating from their mouth or nose when they breathe. They shouldn't have those things, but that's going to be a common trait of everybody that's abusing these inhalants. They have chemical odors that go along with it. I've even heard of people using like insecticides, Freon. One that I was told about the other day was somebody was huffing frying pan lubricant, as he called it. It was Pam. They were huffing Pam, which I got to thinking about and thought that's weird. But then I could maybe see butter flavored Pam might not be too bad. I'm thinking out loud here. I'm talking too much. So, but inhalants are going to be common more with a youthful crowd just because it's easy access and they might already have some of them at home. It's cheap, easy fix, and but it's going to be short-lived. So that's the thing to keep in mind about this. So that's a little bit about inhalants. Another story I have for you real quick on inhalants. I mentioned acetone earlier, or fingernail polish remover. Acetone is another common chemical that people will huff. So a person could literally take the top off of fingernail polish remover and huff it to get high, which to me seems like it would give a really bad headache. That's one of those smells that just kind of gets to me. But I got a call one time to a factory. I was an officer, and this guy called and said, "Hey, you did a drug training for us. I got these 2 new employees. I think they're shooting heroin at work. Can you come check them out?" So I asked him why he said heroin, thinking he was going to have some story about needles or blood marks or something like that. And he's like, "Well, they're laughing and giggling, and can you come check them out?" So when I got there, I noticed that these 2 guys kept sniffing their shirt sleeves, like taking really strong hits of their shirt sleeves. And I thought that was weird. But when I started asking questions about what chemicals they used at this factory, they used acetone, which is a paint stripper. It strips nail polish, but also strips paint. Same as toluene. It's another paint thinner stripper. So these guys were getting high at work off stuff that they had available to them that actually their employer was providing for them. So you can find a lot of people abusing drugs in very, very common places. This is not hard to find this stuff. This next category, this is our third of the 7 categories that we're going to get into. This is a category called Dissociative Anesthetics. Anesthesia. And anesthesia's sole purpose is to prevent you from experiencing the pain of the surgery. It's not a pain reliever. You just don't realize the pain is there. By surgery, because the anesthesia, the anesthetic wears off. Well, drugs in this category will dissociate the body with pain. They don't relieve pain. They just don't let you know that it's happening. So this example I always give a person was, imagine that you take your hand and put it on a candle flame. The closer you get to it, you start feeling that it's hot. The moment that your hand touches that flame, you feel that. A signal goes from your hand to your brain. Your brain recognizes that sensory experience. And what happens is a signal then goes to your hand from your brain that says, take your hand off the hot flame, it hurts. So now imagine that you've got a drug that doesn't let that message get to your brain. So your brain doesn't realize that hot flame is hot. It doesn't realize it's anything at all. Now, after this drug wears off, are you going to realize that you experience pain? Absolutely. So Drugs in this category would be things like PCP, which is phencyclidine, which used to be a horse tranquilizer, and then they realized it was deadly and damaging to horses, so they came out with something called ketamine, which is in the top corner there. Ketamine is now a marketed horse tranquilizer. It's also used on burn wards. They will put ketamine blankets or prescribe ketamine to a person that has a severe second-degree burn over a large area, because it'll kind of take that pain away for a bit. You'll also see some common cough aids on the screen there. You'll see Robitussin, you'll see Delsum, and even Coricidin, which nothing wrong with taking those. I've taken Coricidin cold and cough before because it works. It works very well. But we're not talking about a person taking 2 pills as the directions say. We're talking about a person taking multiple boxes at a time. This is another, when a person likes this type of drug, they like this type of drug. This is really something that they go for. This is not for your casual user. This is for something that people will use again and again because this feels good to them and they like this feeling. You'll notice on the Coricidin box, it says HBP. It's a high blood pressure formula because Coricidin has a tendency, and all of these drugs, they raise the blood pressure in a dangerous way. So they made a high blood pressure version of Coricidin so it didn't raise it too much. That's if a person's taking the prescribed dose. You got somebody that's taking 2, 3, 4 boxes of 16 count pills per box, that's going to do dangerous things to the blood pressure. All of these drugs do. Movie reference. I love movies. Little fun fact about me is I watch a lot of movies, even things that I've seen once or twice. I will watch hundreds of times because I love movies. I love picking up little nuances in movies. One of my favorite movies was Training Day with Denzel Washington, and it's a rite of passage when you go undercover that you have to watch Training Day at least once or twice a week. Anyway, in that movie, there's this scene where they disrupt a marijuana buy, and the marijuana that they seize from it, instead of being in a plastic baggie, was wrapped in aluminum foil, similar to what you see at the bottom of your screen there. Being somebody that had been in law enforcement, I noticed that was weird before anything was ever said in the movie. But long story short, if you've not seen the movie, one officer forces the new officer to smoke that marijuana. After it's over with, he started feeling weird, and he's like, "Yeah, I didn't know you like to get wet." Wet is a term for PCP, and that marijuana had been laced with PCP. That's why it was packaged in aluminum foil, because PCP can soak into the hands transdermally. So it's sold and packaged and handled in aluminum foil. The reason they call it wet or naked, because he even said that in the movie too, is I didn't know you like to get wet. I didn't like you like to get naked. All these drugs will cause the blood pressure to spike to, they consider average to be 120 over 80. Imagine having a blood pressure of 200 over 100. Imagine having a body temperature of 106 degrees. Well, those things are going to make you sweat profusely. You're going to get wet, which when your body spikes that much, you have a tendency to strip off your clothes and get naked. If you get a chance later on and want to see a video of somebody under the influence of PCP, go to YouTube, type in PCP, cops, naked. Don't do it on a work computer or you're going to have to write a memo. But you will see videos of police officers fighting with somebody under the influence of PCP. Now, going back to what I said earlier, it's drugs that dissociate the body with pain. Imagine an officer trying to take someone into custody, them fighting and resisting, and you try standard pain compliance techniques. They're not going to work. As a matter of fact, they're probably just going to sit there and stare at you. There have been instances where people were shot under the influence of PCP and other dissociative anesthetics, and they didn't flinch. They didn't do anything. They didn't go into shock because they didn't feel the pain. And so that's dangerous. That's why this category of drugs is especially dangerous, especially in law enforcement, because you don't know how that person's going to react to it, and it's going to be a very unpredictable situation. You'll see what looks like a nasal spray on here. That's something new that I've added in because it's something that's relatively new in the world right now. For whatever reason, a pharmaceutical company has manufactured a version of ketamine, which is something they will use to sedate somebody with. They are giving people with severe depression a nasal spray form of ketamine, which kind of seems counterproductive to me, that a person who feels depressed and sedated, they're going to give them something to yet sedate them even more. It's just kind of, I don't understand the science behind it or the rationale behind it, but that's actually a thing right now where they're dosing people with depression, they're giving them ketamine. So it's something I just like to throw out there because that is relatively new. At the bottom, next to the aluminum foil packet, you'll see what looks like a couple brown things and some vials. Those are little cigar, like cigarillos, like the really tightly wound, smaller cigars, not the big fatties. I did some training in California. I got to go out and teach with LAPD a while back, and they still see quite a bit of PCP. That's how they see it. See, smoking any drug is the quickest way to introduce it into the body. So what they will do out there is they like to smoke their PCP. If you took a cigarette and got it wet, it's going to look different. So people don't do that, because if an officer is going to search a pack of cigarettes, we're going to notice the cigarette that looks different. So what they'll do is they'll take the little cigars and they'll dip them in the PCP, because it's going to turn brown. Well, that's already brown, so it's harder to notice. And then they'll let it dry, and then they'll smoke it, and they will get high as a kite. So that's what those are. That's kind of like the California method, or the West Coast method of using and ingesting PCP. Otherwise, people can shoot it. They can take it orally. There's a number of ways. Something else, and I couldn't find a picture to show you guys, but so Coracetin is a pill. And this is something you're probably going to see with more of a youthful crowd. Next to it, you'll see the Robitussin. That's a liquid. So one of the things about taking too much Coracetin, the pills, that's when it has the dangerous spike in the blood pressure, because it's got other medicines and chemicals attached to it. What we're starting to see people do with the Robitussin, the liquid, is take that bottle of Robitussin, tie a string around it like a really strong shoelace. And what they're going to do is they're going to make sure the lid's really tight, and they're going to spin it or whip it a bunch. They're essentially making a homemade centrifuge, and they are getting the dextromethorphan, the DM. That's the drug, the active ingredient. That's what they want. They're making that homemade centrifuge, and they're getting the binder and the filler, the stuff that's the red, to go to the bottom, and the clearish yellow liquid on top, which is the dextromethorphan. And then they can just take a plunger and or a syringe and pull it off. And then at that point, they could put it on aluminum foil and bake it and snort it. They can inject it. They could just drink that part. But that's another way to that they've been abusing these things. And then it's not going to have that annoying cherry taste and smell to it. So people are always trying. That's the thing. People that abuse drugs are not stupid. Actually, they're probably going to be some of the most brilliant people you ever meet. But their brilliance comes in a different form, and it's used for other things. So just throwing that out there to you. So this is another category of drugs that's going to cause nystagmus in the eyes. But the big thing with this one, they're going to be sweaty, bright red face. It's going to raise all those three systems of the body. So that's something to look forward to. And they're not going to be functioning well at all. If you have a student or a youth that is abusing Coracetin, will be fried out of their mind. And they're going to be hard to understand. Next category I want to get in. Oh, by the way, here is, they call these Skittles a lot of the times, because you can see by the pill, once it's flipped over, it just looks like red Skittles. So there's also been times where we've caught people with what looked like a baggie of Skittles. Well, they had taken these pills and popped them in their mouth and sucked off like the top layer of the red coating. It popped off the triple C. And then they had just this baggie of red pills, which they kept saying were Skittles, but they were actually Corseed and cough and cold. You'll see at the bottom where someone has taken a bunch of syringes of Robitussin. That was for a party that they, apparently it's rude if you make your guest, draw up their own Robitussin at a party, but that's just another way that a person could choose to ingest these. So there you go. Next category that I'm going to talk about is cannabis or marijuana, which, what can I say? It's the category that most people know the most about. And that's not a slight against anybody. We know stuff about marijuana. A lot of people can readily recognize the odor of burnt marijuana. It's very distinguishable, and that's the thing. Most people consume marijuana through smoking, so it's going to give off that smell. That smell is going to transfer to their breath. It's going to be expelled that way when they breathe. It's going to be on their clothing. It's going to be in their cars. When I was working traffic and drug interdiction and things like that, I mean, it was always easy to get into somebody's car, especially when I could smell the odor of burnt marijuana in their vehicle. That means someone smoked weed in that vehicle. That means I can get them out and search it and look for drugs. And that made it always easy for me. And I know everybody's got their own opinion about marijuana, and I'm not here to change anybody's mind. That's not what I do. I always said I didn't think that marijuana would be legal before I retired, at least in this state, and I was accurate on that. But in the next few years, who's to say what's going to happen? But the thing is, and I mentioned this before, it has become socially acceptable. People think it's no big deal. Officers that I worked with would say it's no big deal. Like, they even changed the law in the state of Kentucky where an officer couldn't arrest for marijuana. You could write a ticket and seize it. But if it was under a certain weight, if it was misdemeanor quantity, then you couldn't arrest for it. So, I knew guys who, if it was just a small amount, they would throw it away. They would flush it. They would throw it down the storm sewer because they didn't want to mess with the time and paperwork for, as they put it, that's just a little bit of weed. It's no big deal. But again, when it comes to our youth, I would consider it to be a big deal because it is considered a gateway drug. There's that natural progression of tobacco. It's acceptable. I'll use it. It's no big deal. I'll move on to alcohol. It's acceptable. It's no big deal. And then, people move on to marijuana because it's acceptable. It's no big deal. Which makes you wonder where it's going to go from there. Some pictures on the screen, different forms of marijuana. The pot leaf is kind of a recognizable thing. There's the picture to my right of it that shows like a marijuana bush. That's a different strain altogether. That actually came from an indoor grow that I found where this guy, instead of growing tall stalks of marijuana, he got a strain that he bought on the internet, which would grow into a bush form because it wouldn't get as tall. It would grow out, which is great if you're growing in a confined space. And what he did was he had multiple shelves set up in his closet so he could have twice as much growing out instead of up. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was a strain called Lowrider. He was very proud of his product. The bud is the part that people are after. It's not the leaf material. It's not the seeds. People don't want that. They want the bud. The stronger the bud, the stickier the bud, the better. I always knew guys that refer to my stuff's so sticky it'll stick on a wall. That was their way of saying I've got great weed. Because the stickier it is, typically the higher the THC content that's involved with it. So in states where it is medically used, it will a lot of times come one big fat bud or multiple buds in a large pill bottle. There's one there at the bottom. That green bottle right there looks like a prescription for Super Bubba for whatever ailment that person has. But that's kind of what a medical marijuana is going to look like. It's going to come in a pill bottle like that. And then we've got obviously a joint. We've got that purple bud over there. See, the hairs on good bud will have a reddish tint to them. The hairs and good, like great bud, will be purple. That's a strain some people refer to as purple haze or perp. People will sometimes claim that they've got perp when they really don't, but that's some fine herb right there. I mean, that's some like really quality that will fetch a big dollar amount. Some of the best weed in the country actually comes from California, where you can grow a certain amount without being charged for it. You can have a certain amount that you can grow, and it's not a big deal. And that's the thing too. People are like, oh, it's legal in California. That's actually incorrect. It's not legal federally anywhere in the United States, but different states have changed their laws. The difference is this: when people started having dispensaries in California, which is the first place that had it, people thought it was going to be a free-for-all. The problem was it didn't fit the federal law. So a lot of dispensaries were busted because the amount that they had hit the federal threshold, and then the feds, the DEA, would charge them with trafficking in marijuana at the federal level, which is 100 kilos. That's 220 pounds. So now people just try to keep it under that threshold, and they can fly by. So a lot of people always ask me, how is it that you can have that when it's illegal by the federal law? You'll see that little pill up in the top. That is something called Marinol. Marinol is a synthetic form of marijuana. It's been around for a number of years, and what it is designed to do, it is for people that cancer treatment is kind of what it's used for. So people always say, well, I'm using it for medicinal purpose. There's a medicine that's already designed for it and FDA approved. And I'm not saying that that THC and cannabinoids and things like that can't be used for medicinal purpose. But the one thing that I always ask people is, if you know that smoking anything will lead to cancer and you don't want cancer, why is it you would choose to consume this product in a way that will eventually cause cancer over time? And yes, there have been documented cases where people that were chronic, no pun intended, chronic users of marijuana through smoking ended up with cancer and bronchitis, and then I'm at a loss for words right now, and some other issues involving the lungs. Why choose to use it in that fashion when there's other forms? But that also leads me into the next topic, and I will get into it here in just a minute. We're going to, as you can see on the screen, we're going to get into other forms of using cannabis, such as edibles and other products. So before we get into that, what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and take us a break. I have 10:57 on my clock. How about we come back at 10 after, if that works with you, Katie?
Sounds great.
All right, guys. I will see you on the dot at 11:10.
See you back, guys. All right, looks like it's 11:10 our time. Are we ready to get started back?
All right. If everybody's back and ready to go, I'll get back cracking with it. So I mentioned that we were going to be discussing some more things in terms of marijuana. So obviously marijuana is one of those things that's always traditionally been smoked, but there, especially in the last 10 or so years, there's a lot more forms that have been increasingly popular. A lot of which because it's easier to hide it and conceal it in terms of its usage. So, because like I mentioned before, the odor of burnt marijuana is pretty strong. It's pretty potent, and a lot of times it's that telltale sign, that giveaway. So, no, hold on. There we go. What is becoming very popular here lately would be the edible form. I want you to really look close at the Nerds rope. That packaging, it almost looks spot on of what it originally does. But if you notice, right above the word Nerds, it says medicated. It's This is a THC form of nerd rope. If you look at those peanut butter cups, which I'm going to be completely honest, I love Reese's. But if you notice that package, it's not Reese's or Reese's, it's Reese. It's just a slight change right there. And you'll notice the cups look as though they're melted a little bit. Those contain THC. What we normally saw up here, at least in Northern Kentucky, would be the Gummy Bears. Gummies are a big thing. Now, if you look at the bottom, though, if you took that Rice Krispie out of a package and it was just sitting there, I mean, it looks dead on just a regular homemade Rice Krispie treat. And it doesn't have that odor of marijuana to it, but the effects are going to be the same. Difference is this. When people consume cannabis or THC through the form of eating it, it has to be digested. So I guarantee you on those, like the Fruity Crispy there, which actually sounds amazing. A Rice Krispie treat made of Fruity Pebbles, that's genius. I guarantee it tells you on the back to only take a quarter or eat a half, because you're going to have to let it soak in. You're going to have to let it digest. And a lot of people have a tendency to overserve themselves, especially when it comes to edibles, because they take too much. This, for those that aren't familiar with this is, you've heard the term dabs or dabbing, or BHO, which is butane honey oil, or shatter, or wax, or those are forms of marijuana. So if you look at that little nail right there with what looks like sorghum on it, that is a very concentrated form of THC. So imagine, here's what we're going to do. I'm not doing it. I'm telling you, here's how a person would do it. You can extract THC from not only the bud, but from trace amounts from the plant material. But you don't want to smoke that. So let's get the THC out so it's stronger and it's easier to consume. So here's what they'll do. Then that one picture, you will see a PVC pipe. And in that PVC pipe, they have crammed a bunch of weed. Let's just say, for the sake of a discussion, let's say they crammed 2 ounces of weed in that PVC pipe. And they put a cap on one end, they put a cheesecloth in the other end, and have a rubber band around it. So that canister you see is going to be butane. Butane is going to help separate THC from the plant material. And it's going to strain through the cheesecloth so you don't get a lot of particulate and sediment. And it's going to strain into that Pyrex container, which is sitting on a griddle on a 5-gallon bucket in what looks like somebody's dirty apartment. But now we have the basis for butane honey oil. So what we're going to do is that's going to have to cook off the butane. So you're going to have to add in water, bring it to a slow, very low boil. You don't want to speed this up. And you're going to want to stir it with a wooden spoon, not plastic. So you're going to stir it until it thickens up, until it burns off that butane. And then you have, like in the bottom corner, what looks like, it looks like somebody burnt something like burnt cheese onto that casserole dish. Look next to it, it's taking a chisel and scraping it off. At that point, it could be put in a vape pen. At that point, it could be cooked into some kind of food. It could be hit with a torch and lit up that way and consumed that way. But those are all ways that people will consume BHO, butane honey oil, or shatter, or dabs, or wax, or that's how it's made. That's how it's used. So I told you 2 ounces of weed, which is a lot of green plant material. So now 2 ounces of weed can break down into a small amount of usable stuff that could be sold, which is going to be stronger and make a lot more money for the dealer standpoint. So it's just another way of consuming it. Here's one that I never talk about, but it's kind of new. It's not new. Let me rephrase that. It's gaining popularity. It's called making a tincture. They're going to make a tincture out of it because you'll see in the one jar there, you'll see plant material. You'll see that they're adding Everclear, which is pure grain alcohol, which, if I'm not mistaken, is 180 proof, so 90% alcohol. That tincture is going to pull the THC out. You're going to heat it up a little bit, but you don't want to get it too hot. So you'll see the first step, which is adding the Everclear to it. You'll see that it's sitting over here in the one next to it. You can start to see where it's getting darker, and they're going to boil it. Or I'm sorry, they're going to heat it up slow, low, and it's going to start pulling the THC from it. And then you can see at the bottom, they're straining it back into a jar, and you're seeing that the particulate and sediment are being caught in the strainer. So you've got now an alcohol THC infused liquid, which is in the small jar next to it. That could easily be cooked into something. That could be consumed. That is going to be strong. I mean, that is going to be, I mean, that's like green shine, you know, a cross between weed and moonshine. It's very, very potent stuff. But tincture is could be used for a lot of things. For those that dabble in CBD oils, a lot of the CBD oil that people get in the droppers to use for sleep will say tincture. It's a CBD tincture. Essentially, they took the male of the plant, not the female of the plant, which doesn't contain all the THC, and they made a tincture similar way. And that's how they're using the CBD oils. That's how that's produced. The synthetic cannabinoids kind of became popular a few years ago when people started messing with like the K2 and the spice. It was sold in your shady gas stations, or as my non-politically correct friend says, the Hey Buddy gas stations, where you would walk in and they say, "Hey Buddy." But you would find them at those kind of gas stations, and it's not potpourri. It's not anything like that. It's a synthetic marijuana. It doesn't contain THC. It would not test positive for THC. If the person consuming it took a drug test, they would not pop positive for THC. When this chemical is consumed, the chemical that's on the plant material is consumed, the body thinks it's THC, so it acts accordingly. It releases the same endorphins that they would if you had consumed THC. This is used a lot of times for people that have to take drug tests, because this isn't going to show up in your standard drug screen. As a matter of fact, up until a couple years ago, if I had somebody for a DUI that was under the influence of this stuff and I sent their blood to the state lab, it's not going to show up because we didn't have the instrumentation to test for this sort of thing. It's very costly, and there aren't enough cases to justify it. But it's another product that people are using in place of it. Problem is, marijuana has been around a long time. We kind of know the long-term effects of it. We don't know the long-term effects to this. So there have been some adverse effects. There's been some people that have had some medical issues arise. There's been even death caused by the synthetic cannabinoids because they're so unpredictable, and there's really no quality control. You've got dudes that are getting chemicals shipped to them from Europe, they find on the black web, and they're adding it to a plant material like Damiana. And they're just spraying these chemicals on the plant material, packaging it, selling it, people using it, and having some problems that go along with it. So brings me to stimulants. This will be our 5th category out of our 7 categories. Stimulants, most common ones are cocaine, crack cocaine, and methamphetamine. Those are the ones that people most commonly think of. But aside from those illegal stimulants, Adderall, Ritalin, those drugs that are used for attention deficit disorders, those fall in the same category. A common question that people always ask me is, why is it that if a person is overstimulated and has attention deficit disorder, why would you prescribe them a stimulant? Simple. Their body is lacking in the chemical that calms them down. By giving them too much stimulant, it creates and forces the body to manufacture and produce more of the chemical to bring them back down. But now you take somebody who doesn't need that drug and they start taking it, they're going to, have the same type of reaction they would if they just snorted a line of coke or did a hit of meth. It's going to be the same sort of thing. Being near colleges, especially when it comes time to finals, you will see a lot of people abusing attention deficit drugs a whole lot more. And the people that are prescribed them know that there's a profit to be made, so they divert a lot of what they're taking, or maybe only take half of what they're supposed to, or if they even take it at all. The cases that I've had in my career where somebody was under the influence of attention deficit meds had a tendency to be the parents of the children who were prescribed it, and they were using it for their own benefit instead of getting it to their kids like they were supposed to. But on the screen, again, you see the nice picture of some very clean, uncut cocaine. It's usually not that white. But to next to it, you'll see the rock form of it. You'll see crack cocaine. At the bottom, you see crystal methamphetamine, which up until a few years back, you didn't see a lot of crystal meth. You saw more of the powder meth like you see next to it. Crystal has made a huge comeback because it's coming out of Mexico, these super labs. It's more pure than we would produce here. It's less expensive to purchase. I mean, it's a buyer's market right now when it comes to methamphetamine. And if you think about it, if you understand how long meth lasts in the body, you truly get more bang for your buck out of it. I'm not trying to sway anyone to take up a meth habit or anything like that. But what you would pay for in cocaine, you could buy the same amount in methamphetamine. Coke's only going to last 60 to 90 minutes. Meth is going to last maybe 12 or 14 hours, especially if it's that pure as that crystal is right there. For those of you that are Netflix fans, there is a special on Netflix right now. It's a 3-part series called Dope. And there is an episode I watched a couple days ago that dealt with the cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, and how they were cooking meth out in the desert, in the high mountains. And it's very interesting to see the scale of these labs. And they're making it the right way. They're making it the same way that we were making it here in Kentucky, except just on a much larger scale. But the sheer amount of meth that they can produce that gets smuggled into the U.S. is why we are seeing such a huge influx of meth right now, because you actually, as far as state law goes in Kentucky, there's a stricter penalty for manufacturing meth than there is for trafficking meth. So people were apprehensive about cooking, even on the one-pot methods, or the shake and bake where they're putting it in the 2-liter, because you can do some serious time over that. But now you don't have to manufacture it. You just have a connect or a plug from somebody that's tied into one of the cartels who can get it into the country that way. You break it up and start selling it that way. And it's less penalty, more reward in terms of profit. So that's why you're seeing a lot of it. Stimulants are one category of drugs that cause the pupils to dilate. I know marijuana will cause pupils to dilate, but stimulants is a huge one. And the people are going to react differently than they would be under the influence of marijuana. Stimulant, person has a tendency to be very animated because, like I mentioned before, they're going to have a sped up pulse rate, and they're just going to talk 90 miles an hour. The other thing about it is stimulants have a tendency to suppress a person's appetite. That's why diet drugs are typically stimulants. That's why some people can start their day with nothing but caffeine and they don't have to eat, because a stimulant could suffice in terms of food. That's why a lot of times people that are chronic stimulant abusers will be thin. I show this picture because that was Amy Winehouse. The one picture was Amy Winehouse when she gained popularity in the United States with a song called Rehab, which is kind of ironic, but she got into Coke. Coke was her thing. That was her jam. She loved Coke. And as you can see in the 2.5 years from one picture to the next, cocaine kind of took over for her. It kind of led to her demise, so to speak. I'm going to move on to, another thing about stimulants real quick. Mention that a person's going to be animated. Bruxism, or the grinding of the teeth, is another big thing, especially with methamphetamine. I mean, a person will just sit there and just grind their teeth nonstop because they can't control it. I've even seen meth addicts who, to avoid having the teeth grind down, would put a football mouth guard in their mouth. They'd walk around with a mouth guard in to prevent them from doing that. But then you'd still see stuff like that where they couldn't control it. The stimulant itself is making the muscles tick and move. When we do our drug evaluation, one of the things that we have a person do is to stand still and estimate a certain amount of time. And then they're going to tell us when they think that amount of time has passed. And one of the things that we'll notice is as they're standing there still with their eyes closed, how much their body is still moving because they cannot control their muscles from moving and twitching and stuff like that. So that and their perception of time will be a whole lot faster. Like 30 seconds to them might actually be 10 seconds to me, because that's how quick their perception of time is, because a person's internal clock is a direct correlation to how fast or slow their heart's beating. Meth or stimulants speed up the heart, so it's going to cause that. Hallucinogens. Hallucinogens have come back, and they have come back in a big way. My own personal opinion as to why hallucinogens have gotten big is because they're typically non-addictive, which means you could seriously be a recreational hallucinogen user and you're not going to have to worry about a pesky addiction. So a person could literally just, I don't know, have some acid on the weekends here and there, put on some music, light some candles, whatever, and not get addicted to it. Maybe a psychological addiction, but as far as a chemical dependency or mental or a physical addiction, it's not going to be there. Most common ones you would see here would be like shrooms, and you'll notice that those mushrooms look weird. Psychedelic shrooms, the one that contains psilocybin, that's what they actually look like. It's not like what you would typically see growing after a heavy rain or what you would normally consume or say at the grocery. We see acid. That eyeball there in the dropper, that's become a common way that people abuse or ingest acid nowadays. Liquid form in an eyedropper and drop it straight into the eye. As a matter of fact, one of our local jails started intercepting packages where people were mailing inmates what they thought was going to be a supply of Visine, when in actuality it was acid put in the dropper. The thing that they noticed about it was it didn't have the plastic wrap on the top anymore, and that's what led them to realize that it was drugs, and they tested it. But that's a common one right there. Below that, you see ecstasy tabs, and they've been pressed with different stamps and colors. The pill that you see there, the powder, that's Molly. Molly is a pure form of ecstasy. It doesn't have all the binders and fillers, and since it's not pressed, it'll hit quicker. It's just a lot stronger. You could also dump that out and snort it. You could even could smoke it if you wanted to, and smoking it again is the quickest way to get any drug into the body. The one thing I will say that people always ask, why is that picture there, would be the morning glory flowers, the morning glory seeds. So acid is LSD. Morning glory contains a chemical called LSA. At least when your body starts metabolizing and breaking down the seeds, your body produces the chemical of LSA, which is really close. It's like a distant cousin to LSD. So what I'm saying is that a person could consume morning glory seeds, the body will digest them, and they will produce LSA in the body, and they will trip like crazy. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm saying that that's something to watch for, because you could be any age and go to any home improvement warehouse or big box store and buy morning glory seeds at relatively little cost. Nothing says you can't do it. Cool thing about this category, all the drugs that fit in this category will exhibit a symptom called a piloerection. It's not a dirty word. It basically means you have goosebumps. I don't care if it's 106 degrees or 6 degrees, a person will exhibit goosebumps when under the influence of any hallucinogen that you see on the screen right now. So it's just something to keep in mind. The biggest thing is they're going to be seeing things that aren't there. They're probably going to make statements that let you know that something is not right. And one thing I can tell you is that a person under the influence who's really rolling, who's seriously tripping on a hallucinogen, might not even understand something as simple as their own reflection in the mirror. They might wonder, why is that dude in my bathroom dressed like me and making the same movements as me? That won't click with them. Like, who is this guy? So something else to kind of throw out there. Bath salts would kind of fall into this category. They're actually a psychedelic amphetamine, which bath salts are not the same thing that you would buy at like Bed Bath & Beyond or Bath and Body Works or anything like that. they're actually cathinones, which methcathinone is this drug that comes from the plant khat, which comes from like Senegal and the Horn of Africa. But when a person ingests it, and by the way, if you've ever heard of the drug Flakka, Flakka and bath salts are the exact same drug. They just changed the name because of the bad press that bath salts got, all because one dude ate the face off a homeless guy in Miami, ruined it for everybody else, and then everybody suddenly is a vegetarian, whatever. But anywho, these pictures would be Flakka or bath salts, same chemical substance. And you could crush that, snort it, smoke it. Problem is, it's a psychedelic amphetamine. So you've got two types of drugs working there, and the results could be very unpredictable, to include eating a person's face. Last category I'm going to talk about would be painkillers, and then I'm going to get into some other stuff that I think you'll enjoy. So painkillers, I mean, just about everybody's had some sort of experience with a painkiller, whether they've had surgery, dental work, whatever the case may be. One of the big dogs was Oxycontin. Oxycontin has been reformulated, so now instead of a pill that you could crush and snort, it's a gel cap. The reason people would crush and snort a pain pill is because it has, as you can see, printed right below the words Oxycontin, extended release tabs. It contained a coating which was time release, meaning that basically you would get 12 hours of medicine. It would slowly release and you could have 12 hours of it. Well, you crush it and snort it, you've negated the time release system, and you've got 12 hours worth of medicine all at once. That's why it became so addictive so quickly. You also have drugs like Vicodin and Lortab. Methadone falls into this category, Suboxone, and of course, fentanyl. Now, fentanyl had, before people were cutting their heroin to fentanyl was a legit, it was in that patch, that Duragesic patch there, which was given to long-term pain relief patients like cancer treatment and things like that. Basically, the reason people started mixing fentanyl with heroin was because heroin was becoming so diluted. Because let's say one person gets a kilo of good quality heroin, they cut on it, they step on it, and they mix it with an adulterant, so they now have 2 kilos. Well, one of those gets sold to this person. It's a lot weaker than it was. Well, this person needs to make a profit, so they're going to step on it and cut it and do the same thing. And it keeps happening on down the line until the person that's breaking it up to sell has a very weak product. So they decided to start mixing it with fentanyl that they were buying and having shipped in from dark webs, getting it from Europe and stuff like that. Fentanyl can be very, very lethal. It's a totally synthetic narcotic, synthetic painkiller. It's made, and it can be deadly if ingested. It can be deadly if handled without gloves because it soaks in transdermally into the skin, and it doesn't take much to kill you right there. So that's a little bit about that. But all pain relievers have certain attributes in common. They will relieve pain. They will cause a euphoric feeling, and they will cause addiction. The other interesting thing is they can also, any painkiller could be used to treat withdrawal symptoms. So if a person was withdrawing from Oxy, they couldn't get Oxy anymore, they could go to another painkiller like heroin, which is why we had the big heroin boom, especially up here in Northern Kentucky. I mean, I remember there being a time when on a standard shift, at least 7 overdose runs per shift. Probably one of them would be to the same residence more than once. See, if a person overdoses from heroin, people that find out about it will try to find out where that person got their heroin and go get it from them. Because if it's strong enough to kill that person, dude, I got to have it. I need that. So that's kind of what that was, that secular effect that we would see a lot of times up here. These are some pictures of heroin, which, you know, the process to shoot is basically you take your liquid, put it in your cap or your pop can bottle, add liquid, heat it up because you need it dissolved. You're going to add in cotton or a cigarette filter to strain it through to pull it up into your needle. You use the cotton so you don't get chunks, because a chunk into your veins could be deadly. So you want it to liquefy. You want to draw it up in there. Once it's filtered, then you're going to slam the vein. The bottom, if you'll see that gray stuff, that was actually a picture that was submitted to me from an officer that I trained. That is called gravel. Gravel is essentially heroin or fentanyl that's been cut and cooked down into a rock form similar to crack cocaine. And it's hard. But if you think about it, it's easy to hide that. I mean, he found that in the floorboard of a car he was searching. He found a piece of paper just like that under the seat. And he found an empty one in the suspect's pocket. Well, he got to looking around in the floorboard, and there were rocks all over the floorboard, which is probably common to most of our cars if they haven't been cleaned in a while. This guy, as he was getting pulled over, took the heroin out, unrolled the paper, kind of unrolled it, dumped the rocks into the floorboard, and shoved one of them into his pocket and one of them under the seat, hoping that the officer wouldn't put two and two together and figure out what he had. And so from this rock point, you can put it into the pop can. You can add your liquid, heat it up, cook it down, break it back down. But it's easy to transport, it's easy to hide, and if it's pure enough, it could even be smoked, which gives another form of administration for those that are afraid of needles. So I'm not taking questions yet, but I am ending my talk on the 7 categories. Now I'm going to move on to something different. So if you've got any questions about the drugs, write them down, and we're going to get to them in just a moment. What I'm going to do now is get into some other, all other things drugs. So like this, which is probably new for most of you. This is called wasping. And I wish that I could say I'm making this up. I'm not. But basically, here's what a person's going to do. And as you can see, these are news articles. These are screenshots from news articles where it's been on the news. So imagine taking the screen out of a window, a metal screen, and spraying it down with Raid or some kind of wasp killer. And then we're going to hook it up to a battery, and we're going to run a current through it, and it's going to crystallize the foam that you've now sprayed, and it's going to create crystals similar to meth. Now, some people will mix it in with their meth to give them more of a psychedelic experience. Some will use it in place of meth. Some will sell it as meth because apparently you can't trust your own drug dealer these days. I mean, what happened to trust in the workplace? Quality of product, whatever. But this has become a trend. I got a coworker that I teach with the Office of Highway Safety who's a trooper, and he works out in Eastern Kentucky. They see wasping out in Eastern Kentucky, which I don't know. When I first heard about wasping, the first thing that came to mind was this had to be started with a bug zapper and a case of Natty Light. I don't know. I just don't know how, because someone says, all right, I got this great idea. I'm going to take some bug spray. Bear with me. But that's a new trend right now. And the results are just mind-blowing how a person's going to react, just totally out of their mind because, you know, none of the this is a product that's used to kill insects, and it even says not for human consumption on there, and people are consuming it in a cooked state. So throw that out there because it's a thing. As is boofing, and I'm just going to apologize now for those of you that know what's about to happen. Those that are looking at the pictures and go, oh, yeah, it is. So essentially, this is a way to administer drugs through other orifices. Yeah, we'll go with that. So basically, you could, and I say you could, not as in I'm giving permission or anything. I'm saying that it is feasible and possible to consume just about any drug through the, as some people would say, the jail purse or the jail wallet, if you will. You could consume drugs that way. And this is not a new concept. Understand that. This is not something new. People have been butt-chugging alcohol for years. There's been instances where people have, and I've gotten this in schools before, where they've had females who were acting drunk, and they actually had vodka-soaked tampons that they were inserting. The thing is, this is very quick and very strong, and it won't take a lot because you're bypassing the digestive system going through. Because the pyloric valve is what, especially with alcohol, it limits how much of a drug or alcohol can seep through. You're bypassing that method by going that way. So, and I've had people tell me after I told them about this that when it came time for Thanksgiving and they saw the turkey baster there, they skipped the gravy after this little presentation. So I apologize, but I'm saying this is kind of a common thing right now that people are using. Fun fact, if a person boofs or butt chugs alcohol, they will still have the odor of an alcoholic beverage emitting from their breath because bloodstream to the lungs, deep lung air, still comes back out that way. Just throwing that out there for you. Paraphernalia, anything in this world could be paraphernalia. People get so one-sided when it comes time to look for drug paraphernalia. They think it's going to be something very obvious. Well, that's what people aren't doing. They're not using the obvious. They're using different things. Like this first row is getting to know your pipes. So you have your typical marijuana pipe. That's also got a grinder there. That's what that blue tin is. That's to grind it to separate the bud from the sticks and stems and plant material. But that's your typical weed pipe. Then next to it, that bulb, that is going to be more of a meth pipe. You're going to put the meth down in it and light up the bottom of the bulb, and smoke it that way. There's a crack pipe right next to it, which is usually found at your truck stops with the little bitty tiny rose in it. And you'll put some Chore Boy, your Brillo in there, and that's going to be used as your typical stem or your crack pipe. And if you think about it, glass conducts heat pretty well. So a person putting those devices, those glass ones, to your lips, they have a tendency to end up with charred or burnt pads of their lips. The pads of their fingers are going to be burnt from holding it while it's lit up. This is more of a DIY meth pipe. You'll see the light bulb over there, and that's a legit meth pipe. So what they'll do is hollow out a meth pipe, or hollow out a light bulb with needle nose pliers and pull the guts out, the filament and stuff. And then you don't want to put your lips on the, you don't really want to have to put your lips on the metal part because that's going to burn. It's going to, peel skin off. So what they'll do is they'll put their meth down in it, light the bowl up, and then they'll hollow out, as you can see, like a Papermate ink pen. And that's what they're going to use to huff the fumes that are coming off of from it. In the center there, that Sharpie, you'll notice that looks like it has a USB drive coming out of it. That is a vape pen. That's a rechargeable vape pen that's in the shape of the big Sharpies. That's a kind of a newer product, but it's an easy hide because lots of people carry Sharpies with them and things like that. On a safety note, there's a guy that I actually follow online who's a survivalist who actually makes non-metallic, so it fit through a metal detector, non-metallic Sharpies that look like a Sharpie when you take the lid off, could be any color, and it's actually a shank. He makes those as a survival thing, and those have actually gone through metal detectors at airports. So from the safety standpoint, something to keep in mind. I like to check Sharpies now that I know that they can be turned into a lot of different devices. So next to that, you'll see your typical shooter's rig. You have your tie, your needles, your cap, everything that you're going to need to light up and filter and shoot with. The bottom row is kind of one of those where people are like, huh? So the pet egg is used to grind and soften and take the disgusting crusties from the bottom of your feet. It could also be used to shave pills down and then take the serrated part off and snort it. The Altoid tin is metal. It's not too big. It's not too small, but it could be used to carry a variety of things. I remember it used to be gold mine for me. If I found an Altoid tin in somebody's pocket and they had bad breath and they weren't somebody that was a typical Altoid user, I knew that I was probably going to find a stash of pills, a joint and a lighter, or a hose clamp and pills and a cut straw, because that hose clamp there is serrated. So they would take the hose clamp, shave their pills with it, and then snort them with the straw in. But they would keep that little kit in an Altoid container. So it's kind of like a Crown Royal bag. There's nothing illegal about having a Crown Royal bag, but it's been my experience in law enforcement that when I find a Crown Royal bag in a car and it doesn't have Crown Royal in it, and it's not an old person with change for the laundromat, they probably have dope in it. I'm just saying it kind of is one of those things. The last portion I want to get to before I start taking your questions deals a little bit with clothing. And again, I am not saying that any bit of this means that person is into drugs just because they're wearing this shirt or that shirt or listening to this kind of music or whatever. I'm just saying that a lot of times it is what it is. So the black shirt you see up there, the spade with the circle around it, is the logo for the clothing company supporting radical habits. And supporting radical habits, like a radical habit, like something like using drugs, it's sold on drug websites, drug clothing websites. It's a clothing company that kind of caters to those that are in that lifestyle. They even make some clothes that have like hidden compartments and stuff like that on it. The yellow shirt next to it, it's DGK, Dirty Ghetto Kids. It's a West Coast clothing company that, again, caters to the drug community. The white shirt there, Seedless. That's the logo for the company Seedless, which anybody that knows anything about weeds, you want seedless. You don't want to smoke the seeds. That's just going to make it pop and crackle, and it's going to serve no purpose. That's why you've heard the term from the 70s, especially the Cheech and Chong fans, Sensimilia. Sensimilia is Spanish for seedless, without seeds. So Seedless is a clothing company that's big in the weed community. And their website sells a lot of clothing and paraphernalia and things like that. Anything to do with Humboldt, which Humboldt is a county in California, which Humboldt is known for having the best weed in California. The best weed is grown in Humboldt County. So you might see somebody wearing a Humboldt shirt or University of Humboldt or something like that. It's just ways of kind of saying I love weed without wearing a shirt that says I love weed. The Highway 420 shirt, I actually own that shirt. It was one of my favorite shirts to wear when I was doing undercover, especially when I was buying weed, because it kind of broke the ice. You know, people are like, oh, I like your shirt, dude. So 420 has always been kind of synonymous with the drug culture, especially marijuana. It's got a long history to it. But the one that most people don't know about is kind of newer, the one next to it. You'll see that picture looks like an upside down oil cap. It also spells the number 710. Dabs are referred to as butane honey oil. So whereas people used to say the word 420, now people are saying 710. Or you might even see a shirt that says it's 709. Got a minute. That's their way of saying I like to dab. It's a little bit more specific than 420 because it's specific to the dabs and the hash oil and the honey oil. But if you see oil caps or 710 or something like that, that's the new thing for like dabbing. The top one, the gray shirt, is from a company called the Humboldt Cure. Again, it's a Humboldt County-based company that's into the drug culture. But they are, again, another drug company. As a person who taught DARE for 9 years, if I see an adult wearing a DARE shirt, I have to ask myself why, because DARE shirts are only given to fifth graders where I work at. So why would a person wear a DARE shirt if not to make a mockery of it? As a matter of fact, before I taught DARE and when I was doing undercover work, I used to buy dope wearing a DARE shirt because people thought no self-respecting officer would wear a DARE shirt to buy dope in. So that was one of my favorite shirts to wear. Anything to do with Scarface, because it just is what it is. It's a great movie. It really is. But I don't think I've ever done a search warrant on a house or apartment where I didn't see a Scarface poster on the wall. Che Guevara, Cuban Marxist revolutionary, kind of revolting against the system, doing his own thing. That was his thing. So a lot of times you'll see people wearing one of his shirts. That bottom one, it says plug. The term plug is a connect or a person you can get large quantities of dope from. That's a picture of Pablo Escobar. So someone wearing a picture of Pablo Escobar, probably into drugs, and wearing a shirt with Pablo and the word plug on there, clearly knows a lot about the game. The center one on the bottom row is Jesus Malverde, which is a narco state narco saint. He is the patron saint of drug smuggling, and was the Mexican Robin Hood who sold drugs and smuggled drugs to help his community, which is a lot of what the cartels do when they're not shooting them. They give money back to their small communities and villages that they're out of, a lot of times to buy their silence. And one of the most recent cartel heads that was caught was El Chapo. I've actually seen some people around wearing El Chapo shirts, or Sinaloa, or Chuacan, which are places around Sinaloa and things like that. So people will advertise for their favorite cartel member. It's kind of like the new Scarface thing to do. I'm a musician. I love music. I love all kinds of music. But some of the music that I will see a lot of times that go hand in hand with drugs would be Bob Marley, Phil Lesh and Friends, the band Fish, Widespread Panic. The Hatchet Man down there is the Insane Clown Posse. It's not my style of music. I don't really care for it, but all their music deals with weed or rape. Sometimes smoking weed while committing sexual assault. That's what their music's about. So I see a hatchet man on the back of a car, I was going to stop that car, and someone was probably going to go to jail. It's kind of like there's nothing wrong with having that sticker on there, but it just tells me that person has a tendency to like the things that their favorite band sings about. Nothing wrong with the Grateful Dead. I'm a fan of Grateful Dead. But I always had this math equation that the more Daddy Bears that you see right below it, the more Daddy Bears a person had on their car, shirt, or backpack, probably the more dope they had on their person at the time. Again, it's not an exact science, but it's one of those things that I always found to be the case. I always show this at the end because people always ask, what did you look like when you worked undercover? When I was clean cut and still a police officer, I looked totally different. But now I'm starting to revert back to my old appearance, it appears. So, and if you would have seen me 2 weeks ago, I had a lot longer hair. But I was afraid that if I was out at the mall with my daughter, people were going to call the police thinking I was abducting my daughter because I looked like an absolute pervert. So I had to change my look. I show this for the simple safety's sake. Try not to give too much information out, especially to your clients and people that don't have to know about you. One of the things that I was always paranoid about is when I was working undercover, somebody would follow me home and get my address. Because if you would have run my address through the PVA's website, it would have popped up my name as the homeowner. And then if you'd have searched it through Google Street View, that was my cruiser sitting in my driveway, which would have been pretty telling of who I was. Told you guys I'm a musician, always have been. And as Katie mentioned before, I have a school assembly program that I do. Luckily, I don't look like that anymore, but I have a school assembly program called Stay Tuned. There's a poster for that, which once restrictions are lifted and I can get back in schools, if you know of anybody that's in need, it's a 1-hour presentation, which I talk about different types of drugs. I play some drums, tell some stories and whatnot. I also have a number of training classes in addition to current drug trends that I do, and I'm in the process of writing a book right now. So if there's anything I can do for any of you guys, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. Right now, I'm going to kind of turn things over to Katie, and any questions that anybody has in this remaining time, hey, fire away.
You guys feel free to pop your questions over in the chat window, or we're a pretty small group. Pipe up and ask your questions. And you can unmute yourself. I've got everyone muted upon entry, but you can unmute yourself if you got a question to ask. Scott has asked how you feel about retirement, Adam.
I'm actually pretty happy with it right now. I'm glad I did it. It's given me more time. It was a weird adjustment at first, to be honest. And when I retired, one of my things that I was planning on doing was to continue playing music, because I was playing up to I was doing about 100 shows a year with this artist I was playing with, which he's kind of taken a back seat to music. And I'm not playing with him anymore. He just recently got engaged, and he's getting what some of us that play music call a big boy job. So I'm not doing that much as I was doing, but it's giving me time to finish this book that I started writing 5 years ago. So I'm doing that. I'm doing this contract teaching, and that's something I've always wanted to do, was to actually teach at the Police Academy in Richmond. But since my kids are so small, I didn't want to relocate. So far, and the most important thing, I don't have to shave, and I can go to the gym a lot more often now. So I'm enjoying retiring.
We have a question there from Justin Hubbard. Do you have a biggest regret with your time in policing, or a biggest enjoyment?
I would say yes to both. Biggest enjoyment was by far teaching DARE. I enjoyed it because I always loved when people would say, DARE is stupid, it doesn't work, it's this, it's that. There's no way to measure any kind of prevention. So how do you know that it doesn't work? You know when it fails, but you never know when it works. But I love teaching DARE because I tried to humanize the position of policing, and I told the students about me. That's why when I went in for their graduation, I didn't wear a uniform on that day. I wore the same DARE t-shirt, skinny jeans, and Chuck Taylors that they were wearing, and I brought drums and I played for them because they knew that I played, but they never saw me as anything other than just a police officer. So that was my biggest joy as far as policing. The undercover was cool, but I felt like I made more of an impact. I mean, I ran into some students the other day at Chipotle, because I love Chipotle. These were a boy and a girl that I'd taught at 2 different schools, 2 years apart, who were now boyfriend and girlfriend, who both recognized me and yelled from the parking lot, "Officer Adam, I had you so many years ago." And we went on and we just sat in the parking lot and talked for a little bit. And that was cool. That was very cool. No one that I ever busted dealing drugs has ever come up to me like, "Bro, I miss you." So I really enjoyed teaching DARE. My biggest regret was taking the job home with me. To be completely honest, there's certain things you can't see. And then not being able to separate the fact that it was a job and not who I was, losing sight of who I was as a person younger on in my career. I see these guys now that are wearing their Oakleys and Thin Blue Line t-shirts that are schmediums and have the stickers on their vehicle. They're eat up and they're going to burn out. But great question.
I've got Scott asked if you would go back into the field if asked, go back for the feds. And then we've got a question about how the shutdown with the virus has affected drug use in Kentucky.
I would not go back into law enforcement. I couldn't actually go work for the feds because there's an age out. At 37 is the oldest you can be to be in a sworn federal job, because you have to retire at 57 from the feds, and you would have to get your 20 in. And I'm in my 40s now. So I wouldn't go back unless I was doing some kind of like background investigator. But honestly, I like being self-employed. I like kind of doing my own thing. I'm not going to show you around my office, but we're in my office right now. This is my drum studio. I'm sitting at a drum set right now. I'm sitting behind one of my kits. I've got another kit there, and I teach here. I make the mallets that I make, which is one of my side jobs. I do all my work down here and hide from everybody else, hide from the world. But no, I don't see myself ever going back into policing. Teaching, absolutely. I totally want to do that. I think the other question I heard in there was how has COVID affected drug usage? I can tell you this. The one thing COVID has affected was the enforcement, because a lot of police, and again, I was out during COVID. I wasn't policing at that time, but I know a lot of guys who didn't go out and enforce things as much. And with the racial tensions and things that happened shortly after, starting in March, a lot of enforcement didn't happen. There wasn't a lot of proactivity in law enforcement. So one thing to say is that, not saying that drug usage went down or went up, but I know the enforcement of it definitely plummeted. heavily. People were still buying drugs. People were still using drugs. Meth is kind of taken over. Heroin's taken a major backseat, especially up here. Because I'm traveling around the state now teaching for the Highway Safety Office. And as we travel around, some places out far east and far west will say they're starting to see heroin now finally, or they weren't seeing it before, where up here, we don't see heroin at all. It's all meth.
All right. Thanks, Adam. It looks like we're just a couple minutes over, but we have one more question. Let's see if we can squeeze that in, and then we'll let people go about their day. But I know this is a really interesting topic, and we have a lot of curiosity around it. Justin asked, any unexpected drug busts? Like totally wasn't looking for anything, but found it.
So I did drug interdiction for a while, and drug interdiction is the art. I say art because it's a skill of finding drugs traveling from point A to point B. Before little Johnny can sell a dime bag out on the corner, that little dime bag came from a bale, which came from a bigger source, which came from eventually probably Mexico. So what I used to do is sit on the interstate and look for dope going up and down the road. And what this would be based off of was I would use change in behavior. If I'm sitting on the side of the interstate, I know most people are going to slow down because they think I'm running radar, and they're going to act accordingly. But once I'm out of sight and they realize I'm not coming after them, they're going to speed back up. So I have two, and I'll make them really fast. One, car went by me, gave every indicator that something was wrong. I got behind them. Tags were expired, so I pulled them over. Guy and a girl didn't know each other's names and said they had been traveling from Tennessee, which typically if people travel from Tennessee all the way to northern Kentucky, they've at least brought up, oh, hey, what's your name, by the way? Stories were totally inconsistent with where they were coming from and where they were going, their relation to each other, their names. Ended up searching the car and found 17 grand cash and a ledger that basically they were on their way to Chicago to buy a kilo of cocaine, which you could buy a key for 17 grand back then. He was a convicted felon. We seized the money, found crack cocaine in a car, found a weapon. So it was a nice little bust, all from an innocent stop of just an expired tag. My favorite out of all of them, it didn't even have to do with drugs. Same thing, side of the interstate. Guy gave me the indicator of locking his arms out and hiding behind the pillar. Pulled him over because he didn't have his seatbelt on. Guy and a girl, she didn't know his name. She just met him at a bar, and it was early morning hours. And she didn't even know where they were going. According to him, it was his girlfriend of 3 years, and this and that. Stories weren't making sense. He was a convicted sex offender, had just gotten out of prison for a series of rapes, already had an active warrant for a strong arm rape, and there's no way to know what was about to happen if that car had continued traveling down the road. I was really, really happy about that one. That one felt good.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. This is always so informative, and you managed to make the topic really interesting when it could be really dark, and it is a dark topic, but you bring the information to us in a great way.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it as always. And if anybody ever needs anything whatsoever, hit me up on my website, social media, and if nothing else, Katie knows how to get in touch with me. You guys have been awesome, and I will catch you all later.
All right. Everybody, I will get the participant list and send out your certificates and an evaluation for you to complete. We appreciate you joining us, and let me know if you want me to help you get in touch with Adam. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.